Let's begin. I'd like to begin by welcoming everyone to this debate on should a third nuclear reactor be built at Calvert Cliffs, an event organized by Dr. Robert Burchard here at UMBC and the Friends of the Library Program Committee. Are we on? We're barely on. And sponsored by the Friends of the Library and Gallery. Now I feel amplified. We have co-sponsors in the MIPAR, Maryland Institute for Policy Analysis and Research, Public Policy Department, Political Science Department, and the Economics Department at UMBC. There's going to be a reception after this event thanks to the Libby Kuhn Endowment. Libby Kuhn was the spouse of UMBC's first Chancellor Albino Kuhn, after which this building is named. So welcome. I am Larry Wilt, the director of the library. I'd like to draw your attention before we turn to the program. I'd like to draw your attention to the poster exhibition, which is in the gallery now. I'm myself very enthusiastic about this exhibition. It was conceived and created by a UMBC graduate, Emily Hauver, and as some of you may know, there are a lot of design majors at UMBC, and they attended this heavily 2 weeks ago at the opening. About 150 people showed up for the opening of this exhibition. Many of the works are from our collection, and then several are on loan from people who learned about our planning this exhibition and wanted to contribute materials. We're also partnered with the design program in that students make posters for a number of the Friends events, and then we use them to publicize our events. I think that gives students some practical experience, and it also publicizes our events. So here's the one for this event with a shocking red and orange emergency feel to it, which was done by Michelle McCoy. Is she here? She's not here. Under the supervision, shall we say, of Gwinnett Abraham, one of our design faculty. So each time we do a Friends event, we do give the opportunity for a design student to get some practical experience in poster design. By the way, if you want to join the Friends of the Library and Gallery, look at the library website. You can find the Friends website, and there's plenty of information on how you may join. Without further remarks, I will introduce the chair of the Friends of the Library and Gallery, who will also serve as moderator of this debate. That is Dr. Stephen Barker.
Well, thank you very much, Larry. Well, I'd start out just by observing that in recent times there has been a great deal of controversy, a great deal of discussion about our nation's energy policy for the future. Here in Maryland, controversy has swirled particularly around the question of the possible building of a third nuclear power plant at Calvert Cliffs. There are two there already, of course. Now, this issue in recent newspaper discussions has got mixed up with the question whether or not it is in the public interest for Constellation Energy to sell half its nuclear facilities to Électricité de France, which is a large French experienced nuclear operator. But this latter question is really a very complex one from a financial point of view, and I'm certainly hoping that in our discussion this afternoon we can steer clear of that and stick just to the question whether it is appropriate and proper to be building another nuclear power plant here in Maryland, considering that there haven't been any such plants built in this country for a good many years. Now, in discussing this issue, we're fortunate to have two knowledgeable people with us. Johanna Newman is State Director for Maryland Public Interest Research Groups, Public Interest Research Group, which is a nonprofit consumer advocacy organization. She earned a BA at Tufts University in biology and in environmental studies. Then she graduated from what's called Green Corps, which was the field school for environmental engineering, environmental organizing, right. Also we have with us Mr. J. Scott Peterson, who's Vice President of Communications at the Nuclear Energy Institute. He graduated from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, with a BA in journalism, and then completed a reactor technology program for utility executives, which was offered at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Well, this afternoon, I'll ask each speaker to make a 15-minute presentation, and then at a later point, we'll have the opportunity for a 10-minute reply to what the other speaker has said, after which we'll have a period for questions from the audience. And finally, after that, we'll have refreshments and an opportunity for individual discussion for those who are willing to remain. So, if you please, we'll start with Mr. Peterson for 15 minutes, who I believe will speak in favor of the third reactor.
Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate that. I don't know if I pushed the right button back there to get that screen running or not. But I just have I'm going to use the screen not to drill you with 25 to 30 PowerPoints. I just want to use it to illustrate a couple of examples as we go forward. As Stephen said, I'm Scott Peterson. I'm from the Nuclear Energy Institute, which is an organization that represents 375 companies, both here in the U.S. and internationally, that have nuclear energy facilities. They manufacture the reactors that are used to produce power. They service them. There are labor unions that work there. There are medical companies that use nuclear technology for the 1 in 3 medical treatments or diagnostic efforts that are used today that use nuclear medicine. So it's a pretty broad range of companies that we represent. And we do that largely in legislative and regulatory issues. So I just wanted to give you that as a little bit of a primer on our organization. As Stephen said, obviously we think that nuclear energy should be expanded as part of a comprehensive energy framework to reduce the effects of climate change and to put us on a path to a clean energy future. We think it's appropriate that nuclear energy be part of a balanced, common sense approach that includes all low carbon sources, wind, solar, biomass, and the others that many of our companies are building in addition to nuclear energy plants today. Similar to wind and solar, nuclear energy plants don't emit any greenhouse gases during the production of electricity. However, it is developed and is appropriate to use now, and actually the use of nuclear energy will help enable the expansion of renewables across the country, and I'll get into a little bit more on that a little bit later. At 72%, nuclear energy is by far the largest carbon-free source of electricity we have today in the United States. All of our electricity generation, if you look at it as an entire portfolio, only about 28% is generated by non-emitting sources, nuclear, wind, solar, biomass, hydropower. Of that 28%, here's what the pie chart looks like. So you can see already 104 reactors in 31 different states are already playing the most significant role in terms of producing electricity, not only without producing greenhouse gases, but also without emitting any air pollution that contributes to acid rain and smog. And so they've already, since the 70s when the Clean Air Act was passed, already been a major contributor to reducing air pollution that contributes to acid rain and smog. Nuclear is not only expanding here in the U.S., but it's expanding globally, with 53 new reactors being built around the world today. Recent studies by the Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Energy Information Administration point to really a necessary role for a pretty broad nuclear expansion if we're going to both generate the electricity that we need along with the carbon reductions that we want. The Environmental Protection Agency, in its analysis of the climate change bill that passed the House of Representatives, the Waxman-Markey bill, looked at the provisions in that bill and did the analysis of what kind of electricity profile that we would need to meet 80% reduction in carbon by 2050. They said that we'll need 187 new nuclear power plants by the year 2050. That's if all of our plants continue to operate for 60 years, the ones we have today. When you look at the Energy Information Administration, that's an agency within the Department of Energy, they did the same analysis and determined that by 2030, which is the near-term goals, we're going to have to build 69 new reactors in this country just to meet the carbon reduction goals that are laid out. And that includes solar, that includes wind, that includes energy efficiency. And according to EIA's analysis, at that point, if all of that happened, and it's a tough road to make all that happen, then nuclear energy would generate about 33% of all U.S. electricity. And what it would do basically is back out a lot of coal-fired power in the process, because the idea with a carbon bill is you would shut down a lot of the older coal plants and try to put some environmental technologies to clean the newer ones. And so you would have that large amount of coal power that would be retired with advanced reactors taking their place for the big baseload plants. Calvert Cliffs 3 is certainly not the only solution to Maryland's future electricity needs, but it's an important solution for future generations. A new reactor at Calvert Cliffs is a clean energy solution, but it's also a major economic driver for the state of Maryland. Governor O'Malley toured that plant last year and told the Washington Post that it was a moral imperative to have nuclear energy if we were going to reduce greenhouse gases and meet our future electricity supplies. Operating 24/7, Calvert Cliffs already accounts for 28% of the electricity production in Maryland. Just think about that, one location producing nearly a third of the power that the whole state uses, and that's the power that we get from nuclear energy. It's also among the lowest life cycle carbon emitters along the entire electricity production scale. Here's another slide that really lays out the life cycle carbon emissions from all the energy sources. This is a study that was done by the University of Wisconsin. There are other studies internationally that have been done. And what this accounts for is the carbon output from these energy sources from the beginning of the process to the end of the process. So for nuclear power, that includes the mining of uranium, the enrichment of uranium to make the fuel that we use, construction of the plant, and then ultimately decommissioning of the plant. So all through that process, it does an accounting of the carbon emissions that's going to be emitted. And so if you look at it, there are no carbon emissions during the production of electricity at nuclear power plants. But based on this life cycle, the University of Wisconsin says that there's 17 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per gigawatt hour. And as you can see on the chart, that's pretty comparable to nuclear and geothermal and wind. And you can see some of the issues we have with the fossil fuels on the left side of the chart and the carbon emissions that they produce. So that gives you an idea of the challenge that we have. And also, at the same time, the benefits we have from having all of those sources of low carbon electricity to generate. So we have a portfolio of options we can choose from, and we should choose from. Again, using the large baseload sources like nuclear and bringing in some of the smaller and intermittent sources like wind and solar. Maryland and the rest of the Mid-Atlantic region is projected to need 31% more electricity by the year 2030, according to EIA's data. And that's a significant factor to keep in mind. The rest of the country looks like about 20% electricity demand in that same time frame. So you can see that Maryland and the Mid-Atlantic region is going to grow a lot more than the rest of the country. And that's why you're seeing a lot of the new nuclear power plant projects focused on the Mid-Atlantic states in the Southeast, because that's where electricity growth is really staring at us in the near term. Equally important to many, a new reactor is going to be an economic driver. The new plant at Calvert Cliffs, if it's built, would create 4,000 construction jobs to build the plant. It would also create 400 permanent career-long jobs, and that's important because the plant's going to operate over 60, perhaps 80 years long. So these are career jobs that can be filled to operate the plant at Calvert Cliffs. It's also going to generate about $430 million a year into the local economy. And it's also going to be a contributor to the $1.9 billion economy here in the state of Maryland for nuclear energy components and other procurement items that we have. 49 out of 50 states, we do business in 49 out of 50 states for nuclear energy procurement. Maryland is the #1 state at $1.9 billion. So that's the impact that our industry has on your state economy. Going forward, building a new reactor at Calvert Cliffs obviously will increase that number. Our hope also is that building the new plants that we're looking at, we have 13 license applications that the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, is reviewing for 22 new reactors, and we're hoping that that's going to jumpstart commercial nuclear manufacturing in this country. We have essentially lost the bulk of our manufacturing base for nuclear energy, and we're in a global marketplace to get the major components that we're going to need. Now, that's not an issue for the first wave of plants that are going to be built, because we've been in the queue globally. We're in the global queue for the components that we need, and we think we'll be in good shape there. But we have an opportunity with losing a lot of our U.S. manufacturing base overseas to reinvigorate one sector and create tens of thousands of jobs in the near term. In the last 3 years in our industry, we've created 15,000 new jobs just to prepare, just to do the engineering and the other services that we need to build new reactors. So you can see the economic driver that it can be. Calvert Cliffs 3 also has strong support from decision makers and from the public. The Calvert County Commission is unified in its support for a new reactor at Calvert Cliffs. The Baltimore Sun has supported it on its editorial pages. Many members of the state's congressional delegation, including Steny Hoyer, support the facility. Labor is a big supporter, and Calvert Constellation Energy has already struck an agreement, project labor agreement, with the building and construction trades of the AFL-CIO to have the labor available to build the plant. It's the only agreement of its kind in this country, and it'll be a significant help to getting that plant built, building it on schedule, and using the best labor we have possible to build it. That's important. The local community also supports the reactors, and it's really endemic of local community support for nuclear power in general in communities that are close to reactors. We do a lot of public opinion survey research at NEI, and one of the things that we do is survey the local population around each nuclear power plant in the country every 2 years. And according to a survey of 1,000 residents that we did in August, 3 out of 4 people who live within 10 miles of U.S. reactors say they would accept a new reactor at the site closest to where they live. These are people who know neighbors who work at the plants. They're comfortable with the safety records of these plants, and they've seen the economic value of these plants to their communities, to their schools. I think if you look particularly a lot of rural communities that have nuclear power plants like Calvert County used to be, they've made a significant impact on the quality of life in those communities. Here's the status of Calvert Cliffs 3 today. The combined construction and operating license for the facility has been filed with the NRC. As I said, one of 13 applications that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is reviewing today. The Calvert Cliffs project labor agreement that I mentioned is an important step forward. And so they have the labor pool lined up if they were to make a decision to build the plant. In June, the Public Service Commission issued a final order approving the application for a certificate of need to build the plant. That process addressed a whole range of environmental and reliability impacts of the facility. The startup costs for the facility are higher than other energy sources. Nuclear power does have high capital costs because these are large plants and it is sophisticated technology. So we do have a large cost of putting these plants online. However, over the 60 to 80 years of operating and generating electricity at these plants, today they have the lowest cost of production among most power plants in this country. Significantly lower than natural gas, significantly lower than the limited power plants that we have that still use oil, and lower even than coal. So from a pricing standpoint and from an affordability standpoint, once the plant is built, it's going to provide reliable, stable, and low-cost electricity over that period of time. Here's an analysis that the Energy Information Administration did recently, looking at all of the new technologies that could be built to supply electricity to the grid. And what you see on the yellow line is that the levelized cost for electricity looking out at 2016, which is about the time frame where we see new reactors beginning to come online. We think the first reactors will come on 2017, 2018 timeframe. But that gives you an idea of where the cost of electricity from nuclear power plants is going to fall against a lot of other alternatives. Nuclear energy is going to be competitive based on all those factors. It takes into account not only the cost of building the plant, but the cost of operating it, the cost of fuel over that time, and the investment in transmission lines to move that power to where it's needed. It also accounts for capacity factor, and that's one of the big drivers in efficiency for nuclear power, is that on an industry average, it operates 90% of the time that it's capable of operating. And that's a huge driver in affordability of cost. I have a couple more comments, and then I'll have a seat. Calvert Cliffs is already a strategic energy security and environmental asset for the residents of Maryland. The two reactors at that site have a proven record of production and safety since the 1970s. These benefits are well documented. Low cost of electricity for consumers, high reliability of power supply. In March, Calvert Cliffs 2 set a new world record for continuous operation of a pressurized reactor, operating without interruption for 693 days. So that's power production, 693 days, 24/7, before they had to stop to refuel. During this record-setting stretch, the plant capacity factor that you see is average 90, was 99%. The clean air benefits of Calvert Cliffs are well documented. In 2008, the plant prevented 13.2 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions by generating electricity from nuclear rather than other fossil fuel sources. So that's equivalent to taking about 2.5 million cars off of Maryland's roadways. That's almost all the cars in Maryland. Part of this environmental stewardship also includes the commitment to safely managing used uranium fuel rods at the site. That's a commitment that the industry has. We manage all of the used fuel rods at our sites today. The federal government ultimately has the responsibility by law to manage that fuel, but until that day comes, we continue to manage those safely as part of our commitment to safety across the whole site. Let me close just with a few points, if I could. We shouldn't take the issue of future electricity supply lightly. Reliable electricity drives economic development and growth, and it drives our standard of living. We also know that low-carbon electricity will be increasingly important in the coming years, given the direction of federal climate change legislation. And the Senate is going to begin hearings next week looking at a companion bill to the House-passed climate change bill. When it comes to energy, diversity equals security. That's why energy diversity should be America's policy. We should embrace all forms of technology, nuclear energy, but also wind, solar, biomass, natural gas, and clean coal, particularly if we can develop a way to capture the carbon coming out of coal plants. All of those options are going to lessen our dependence on unstable sources of electricity, unstable sources of energy. With Maryland's electricity demand expected to rise, Calvert Cliffs 3 is vital to the state's comprehensive clean energy portfolio. I appreciate your time and attention. I'll be glad to take any of your questions when we're finished with our period up here of speaking and rebuttal. Thank you.
Thank you, and now we'll hear from Ms. Newman.
Great, thank you. Is this mic working? Great. Can we exit out of this?
Just hit escape.
Escape. Great. Perfect. So my name is Johanna Newman, and I'm the State Director of the Maryland Public Interest Research Group. We're a state-based, nonprofit, nonpartisan consumer advocacy organization. And when Bob approached us to see if we were interested in participating in this debate, the question was, should nuclear be used to meet Maryland's growing energy needs? And based on the research that we've done, the answer is clearly no, because there are cleaner, cheaper, faster, and safer alternatives available. So what I want to do in this presentation is basically outline the problem that Maryland is facing with regard to its energy needs, lay out a couple of different paths that we could go. So I'm going to kind of lay out the nuclear path, and then I'm going to lay out a clean energy path and evaluate those on the basis of affordability, reliability, and safety. So by way of context, Maryland is in fact facing very serious energy problems. Utility rates in the state, particularly for BGE customers, have gone up 85% over the course of the past decade, largely as a result of the deregulation of our state's energy system. And meanwhile, that is really putting a pinch on residents in the state. Hundreds of thousands of people have received shut-off notices because they can't afford their bills. At the same time, we are facing very serious reliability problems. The Maryland Public Service Commission, which is the regulatory agencies that oversees the utilities in the state, estimates that unless we do something, our state could face brownouts and blackouts as early as 2011. So clearly, we are facing very real energy challenges, and the question is, what's the best way to solve those? I agree with Scott that we need to look at all the options and then choose the one that makes the most sense for Maryland. And in fact, last summer, Maryland PIRG commissioned a study to look at all of the energy options that are available to Maryland and to evaluate them on the basis of affordability, reliability, and impact on the environment and public health. And that study very clearly showed that a clean energy path beats out nuclear power by every measure. So let me be clear that what Scott and I are debating with Calvert Cliffs 3 is Maryland's energy future. We already have an energy system in the state, and I want to just quickly paint the picture of what that energy portfolio currently looks like. Maryland currently gets 59% of its energy from coal, 29% from nuclear power. So that basically gets us to 90% of our energy. And then the remaining 10%, 4.5% is from natural gas, 3.3% is from hydroelectric dams, 2% from petroleum, and then slightly more than 1% from clean renewable sources like wind and solar. So you can see that nuclear and coal already dominate our state's energy portfolio. What we're debating here today is what resources do we want to expand moving forward? What do we want to get online in the next 10, 15, 20 years to diversify our state's energy portfolio? So I want to just quickly lay out a couple of different options here, and then we'll evaluate them. So the option that Scott is promoting is the expansion of that nuclear piece. We already get about 30% of our state's energy from nuclear. He's proposing that we add another roughly 12% to that. And the clear vehicle to do that would be through building a new nuclear reactor in Lusby, Maryland, on the shores of the Chesapeake Bay. What I'm here to advocate for is that we invest in a clean energy portfolio to expand that 1.2% of Maryland's energy that currently comes from clean energy. Now, this clean energy future could have a lot of different faces, but the fastest and cheapest way that we're going to meet our state's energy needs is through aggressive investment in energy efficiency. There's also tremendous potential in combined heat and power technology, and we need to start taking advantage of the tremendous wind and solar resources that we have here in the state. So I want to just quickly define what each of these clean energy sources is. Energy efficiency just means using the energy that we already create more wisely. And a perfect example of this is an Energy Star refrigerator. On average, an Energy Star refrigerator uses 80% of the energy of a non-Energy Star fridge, but it keeps your food just as cold and is just as functional, just uses less energy. So this is different from putting on a sweater or turning down your thermostat. It's actually using the energy more wisely to create the exact same effect. And Maryland has tremendous energy efficiency potential. The second technology that I'm going to touch on is a technology called combined heat and power. And combined heat and power pairs the production of electricity with the production of heat for useful purposes. Now, there are a lot of really small-scale power plants throughout the state. In fact, I'm sure the campus that we're on has its own small power plant. And on average, those power plants operate at about 35% efficiency. The remaining 65% of the energy is lost through heat. That isn't put to any useful purpose. A combined heat and power plant recaptures that heat and puts it to use, turning generators that then can be used to heat and cool buildings. There are 18 of these facilities already operating in Maryland, one at the University of Maryland, one at Aberdeen Proving Grounds, one at NIH. It's a tested technology that we know works. And according to the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, Maryland has enough technical potential for combined heat and power that would double the capacity of the proposed nuclear reactor at Calvert Cliffs. And then there are the resources that people traditionally think of when they think clean energy. They think wind turbines, they think solar panels. Just to put it in context, to create roughly twice the amount of power that Calvert Cliffs 3 would generate from solar would require about 6,000 acres of solar photovoltaic in the state. That would easily fit on commercial rooftops and over parking lots in the state, so you wouldn't have to develop any green space to do it. You could just layer it on top. And the added benefit of that is then the power is generated very close to where it's actually used, and so you really minimize the need for expensive new transmission infrastructure. And then, of course, there's the potential for wind. In Maryland, most of our wind potential is offshore. In fact, the Mid-Atlantic region has tremendous offshore wind potential. Even if those turbines are only spinning a third of the time, if we maximize that potential, those offshore wind turbines could power the state of Maryland 12 times over, even if they're just spinning a third of the time. So, and the exciting thing is that this is happening. In 2008, Delmarva Power, which is the utility that serves the eastern shore of Maryland and parts of Delaware, actually signed a contract to build some of these offshore wind turbines off the coast of Delaware. So it's happening, it's moving forward. So those are the two options. One is building a centralized nuclear power plant. The other one is pursuing a diversified energy portfolio that makes that renewable wedge of the pie larger. So now I want to just compare these options on affordability, reliability, and safety. Affordability is a key concern for the public in Maryland. The fact that rates have gone up so dramatically is really, really hurting families throughout the state. More than 70,000 BGE customers had their power shut off in June because they can't afford their bills. I mean, it's a very serious problem. And in Maryland, because we're a deregulated market, the wholesale price for power is basically set by the power plants with the highest operating costs. And I'm guessing that this is one of the points where Scott and I are going to disagree, because I actually think the cost of nuclear power is very, very high, and I'll outline why I think that. So right now, the price, the wholesale price for power is set by natural gas, but if Calvert Cliffs 3 comes online, it is very likely that nuclear and the power from Calvert Cliffs 3 would actually set the market rate for wholesale power, thereby driving up utility rates for everyone in the state. In mid-2005, so this is 3.5 years ago, Constellation Energy said that building the plant would cost between $2.5 to $3 billion. Last summer, they said that they estimated that it would cost $10 billion. So that's a fourfold increase in a matter of 3.5 years. And then the truth is that the plant is likely to actually cost much more. A utility that's pursuing a similar design, in fact the exact same design in Pennsylvania, is estimating that it'll cost them $15 billion to build a plant of the same design as Calvert Cliffs 3, and that includes the financing costs. But to be honest with you, even that estimate is likely to be a lowball figure because it doesn't take into account cost overruns. And this industry is plagued by cost overruns. Of the 75 reactors that were operating in the United States in 1986, the actual cost exceeded the budgeted costs by 209 to 381%. So they more than, on average, doubled. The cost was double what they initially budgeted. And you hear arguments from the nuclear industry that the new fleet of operators is going to be modular and that they won't have those kind of cost overruns. But when you actually look at what's happening with the new wave of reactors that's being built, you're seeing the same pattern. Areva's prototype reactor for Calvert Cliffs 3 is currently under construction in Finland. And that project is now 75% over budget, has been under construction for 3 years, and they're already 2 years behind schedule. So, the cost of nuclear power is high, and it's likely to get higher. And then the reality is that Constellation Energy is going to have to recoup those costs from ratepayers if they're going to pay back their investors and if they're going to turn a profit. So BGE customers currently pay about 12 cents per kilowatt hour. You can go home, look at your bill, that's roughly what you'll see. The California Energy Commission issued a report in August of this year that basically projects out the estimated cost of producing power from a number of different sources. And nuclear power came in as the highest on their projections. In fact, they're estimating that a reactor that comes online in 2018, which is the earliest that Calvert Cliffs 3 could come online, would cost a staggering 33 cents per kilowatt hour. So almost 3 times as much as BGE ratepayers currently pay. And then I'm not certain whether that's a levelized figure, but some of the levelized figures that are out there, which may be a more conservative estimate, still put it at 23 cents per kilowatt hour, which is double what BGE customers currently pay. I mention this because as regulators in the state are making decisions about our energy future, they need to look at all the options. And so I want to lay out what the cost impact of a clean energy future for the state could look like. So energy efficiency, like I said, is the fastest, cheapest, cleanest way that we can meet our energy needs. And not only is energy efficiency incredibly reliable, works around the clock, but there is a ton of it out there. I mean, the average Marylander right now the average Californian uses 42% less energy than the average Marylander. And that's weather-adjusted figure. And that's really simply because California's utilities have been investing in energy efficiency for the past 30 years. Whereas in Maryland, we used to have really great energy efficiency programs, and then with deregulation, our utilities abandoned those programs. The American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy estimates that Maryland could actually reduce its electricity consumption 30% by 2025. And it would cost roughly 3.9 cents per kilowatt hour for residences to do that, and 2 cents per kilowatt hour for the industrial and commercial sectors to do that. So again, we're currently paying 12 cents per kilowatt hour. We can save a kilowatt for roughly 4 cents per household. So, the value of energy efficiency is vastly cheaper than the market rates we're currently paying for power, and it's orders of magnitude cheaper than power from a nuclear power plant. Meanwhile, you have combined heat and power, which can deliver 4 times the energy per dollar invested than nuclear, and wind farms can produce twice as much electricity than nuclear power for the same dollar invested. And then I do want to talk quickly about the cost of solar photovoltaic. It is true that right now the cost of solar photovoltaic is higher than that of nuclear power, but in many ways the solar industry is a lot like the computer industry was in the 1970s. Now, there's some people in this room who may remember in the 1970s we had big mainframe computers that were very bulky, very expensive. But over the course of the past 20 years, now we have wafer-thin laptops that have tremendous storage capacity and are very fast. That's basically what's happening with the solar industry. Their manufacturing capacity is doubling every year, and by 2018 and possibly sooner, the costs could be very comparable to that of nuclear power, if not lower. So while solar is kind of on a trajectory going downward, you see none of that kind of trajectory promised in the nuclear industry. So the next point I want to touch on is reliability. I already said that the Maryland Public Service Commission estimates that Maryland could face brownouts and blackouts as early as 2011. So let's compare a clean energy path versus the nuclear path, given those reliability shortages. First, the earliest Calvert Cliffs 3 could come online is 2018. It misses the ballpark of our reliability problems by 7 or 8 years. So in that respect, it's totally irrelevant. And then, again, I just want to reiterate that the prototype reactor that's under construction in Finland right now is already 2 years behind schedule. And they've only been working on it for 3 years. And then there's also concern about having these centralized power sources. So during a brownout or a blackout, nuclear power plant, often those brownouts and blackouts are caused by problems in the transmission grid. So it's not a problem at a plant, it's actually a problem in the power lines. And anytime that there's a transmission problem, a nuclear power plant actually has to power down for safety reasons. And it generally takes a plant anywhere between 10 and 14 days to power back up to full capacity. So if we build Calvert Cliffs 3 in the state and are relying on it to provide 12% of the state's energy, and there's some kind of transmission problem, it basically means we have all our eggs in one basket, and during that time period while the plant is shut down and while it's powering back up, the state could suffer very real economic consequences. Some people may remember the big East Coast blackout from August 14th, 2003. But 50,000 people lost their power in that blackout, and it cost our economy anywhere between $6 and $10 billion. So, the kind of impact that those shortages have on nuclear power are significant. Whereas if you have rooftop solar, you may not even know that there's a blackout going on, that your neighbors are suffering because you still have your own distributed generation source. So, the truth is that a clean energy future can keep the lights on in the long term and in the short term. A clean energy future can actually address those short-term shortfalls that we're facing in the state. And it makes us much more resilient to disruption. Maryland a year and a half ago passed a statewide energy efficiency goal of reducing per capita electricity use 15% by 2015. Simply by meeting that goal, our state can keep the lights on through 2025, even if no new generation comes online. And I think some new generation sources will come online. Unlike a nuclear power plant that takes 10 years to build, we can install solar panels quickly, less than a year. We can install wind turbines very quickly. And with regard to energy efficiency, it's literally as fast as changing a light bulb or replacing an appliance or upgrading an industrial process. I do want to say that wind power is admittedly an intermittent resource because the wind doesn't always blow. But like I said before, even if the wind turbines are built offshore and they spin 33% of the time, they can still play a significant role in our state's energy future. And then solar panels are also intermittent in nature because if it's cloudy or raining, they're not going to produce as much power. But it's convenient that solar actually matches up very well with periods of high peak demand. So the time when our grid is most stressed and when we use the most power are on hot summer afternoons when the air conditioners in office buildings are buzzing and kids are home watching the afternoon cartoons. That's the peak demand. And that's also the time when solar is going to be operating at peak efficiency. And again, the fact that there is no transmission limits and they can deliver power straight to where it's being used is a serious advantage for solar. Lastly, I want to touch on points of safety. So there are very real safety concerns with expanding nuclear power. If Calvert Cliffs 3 gets built and is approved for the first 40-year license, over that 40 years, the plant will generate roughly 1,450 tons of radioactive waste. This waste is toxic for tens of thousands of years, and the current plan is to store it indefinitely on the shores of the Chesapeake Bay. It'll be in a pool of water for several years, and then they'll move it to above ground dry cask storage. The other alternative for this waste is to have a central national waste repository, like has been debated for years and years, to build in Yucca Mountain. Well, the Obama administration has basically squashed plans to build Yucca Mountain, and even if we find an alternate site, there are very serious concerns about transporting this waste. The Environmental Working Group did a mapping study several years ago and found that if waste is transported from Calvert Cliffs 3, it'll pass by 900,000 households in Maryland. By truck, it would go on a 495. If it went by rail, it would go through the Harbor Tunnel in Baltimore. It would pass within a mile of 163 schools and 5 hospitals, just in our state alone. So the waste remains a completely unsolved, unaddressed problem. There are also various concerns around accidents and terrorist attacks. Now, I understand that the risk here is low. We haven't had a very serious accident at a nuclear power plant in the United States, but if we did, it would be catastrophic. And it is known that Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups have targeted nuclear power plants. That was on their target list. And Calvert Cliffs 3 would be 50 miles from the nation's capital. There's also safety concerns around weapons proliferation. There is currently not enough high-grade uranium available to power nuclear power plants beyond the 40 to 60-year time frame. And Calvert Cliffs 3 is designed to operate on plutonium if needed. So given that there is a bottleneck on high-grade uranium, the industry may need to start reprocessing spent fuel. And that creates weapons-grade plutonium, which is kind of the fuel of choice for nuclear weapons. So should that fall into the wrong hands, there are very serious concerns there from a national security perspective. And the United States has actually had a ban on reprocessing spent fuel for the past 20 years because of those proliferation concerns. By contrast, energy efficiency doesn't create radioactive waste. Terrorists don't target wind turbines or solar panels. And solar panels definitely aren't going to compromise our nation's national security. So in closing, from our perspective, Maryland would be better off if we expand our investment in clean energy and turn our back on the proposed nuclear reactor at Calvert Cliffs 3. Thank you.
Scott, would you like to reply for 10 minutes max?
Sure. I think what you heard was probably a lot of agreement in one sense from both Johanna and my comments, and that's that we need to look at a clean energy, diverse approach to meeting future energy needs. That can't be one source of electricity. We need a lot of wind, we need a lot of solar, we need a lot of biomass. Hydro is difficult to develop. And so what you need with all those intermittent sources, as I said earlier, is a stable 24/7 source of clean power. And so we believe nuclear has to be part of that package. I do agree that we should take the energy efficiency steps that we can take. We've obviously seen the success there in California. It's a success that's been mandated by law in California, so there's a driver behind that. The utilities have been partners in that, and the consumers have been partners in that, and it's worked out well. There's obviously, if we think of our own homes and our own offices, there's obviously efficiencies we can gain across the board there. One of the energy efficiency stories in nuclear is over the last 15 years, we have operated our plants so efficiently that we've essentially added the equivalent of 29 reactors to the electricity grid without laying a single brick to build a new one. By driving our efficiency up to 90%, we've added that number of reactors, so it's basically another third of the nuclear energy that we've had in this country. The other side of that is, and Johanna mentioned uranium, we do have a 100-year supply of known uranium reserves that we can tap. But since 1993, under an agreement with the Russians, we've been using down-blended uranium from Russian warheads and rendering those warheads ineffective. Taking that fuel from the Russians, making it into uranium fuel that can generate electricity. And so today, 10% of all electricity in this country is generating using uranium that used to be in Russian warheads. So when you look at the proliferation aspects of that, not only are we driving energy efficiency benefits out of that by not using fresh uranium from the ground, but we're also rendering what could be weapons used in the future harmless by using the uranium out of that fuel. So I think we even in our industry, there's a track record of efficiency there that's not a well-known record. And I think we're going to build on that in the future as we operate new reactors. I'm going to try to go down this list and sort of pick off a couple of issues, mindful of the time to give you for questions. The potential of renewables, I think, is one that we all embrace, but I think it's one that we should recognize. We have about 2% of electricity in the state of Maryland today from wind and solar and other renewables. Nationally, that figure without hydro is about 4%. We should develop renewables, but we should recognize at least the near-term limitations of that. And there have been federal incentives approved by Congress. There have been renewable energy portfolio standards approved by the states, all to jumpstart the renewable energy sector. Yet that sector still remains a fairly limited amount of electricity generation. We should expand it, there's no question about that, but we should also recognize the limitations that are there in terms of not building anything else along with it, and I think that's real. On the project management experience of building reactors, we are in several different countries today as a U.S. industry looking at the experiences that are happening all around us in terms of building new reactors. We also have a very good track record with nuclear projects that have been either refurbished or finished, projects that were started in the 70s and stopped. Tennessee Valley Authority in particular has done an excellent job of going back in, doing about a 70 to 80% refurbishment at Browns Ferry, bringing it in on schedule and within budget. They finished another reactor called Watts Bar on schedule and within budget. So as an industry, we recognize that we've had challenges in this aspect in the past, but I think our recent experience is a good one. And the project development experience we're learning from other countries, we believe will help us as we start to build reactors here in this country. One of the issues that Johanna talked about was the speed of technology development in solar. And that is true, but that's the case with all energy technologies. Others don't advance while others stand still, and we've had definitely technology developments in the nuclear industry. We will be building a new generation of nuclear power plants for this country that's new technology. It is based on the current reactor technology, so we are able to draw on the some 3,000 reactor years of experience that we have in this country operating those plants. If you put all the years of experience together at the 104 reactors we have, that's about how much experience we have to call from. And our industry has cataloged that operating experience very deliberately, so we can share that across the board. So we will use that experience from the reactors we have operating today, and we will also put into those reactor designs, and they have been put into those reactor designs, some efficiencies in safety, some enhancements in safety. We're using gravity and things like heat, convection heat instead of pumps and valves. So we've taken some of the mechanical parts out of that and relied on gravity for cooling water distribution, for example. So we do have technology developments not only in the operating plant side of our industry, but we're also looking forward to the day where we can perhaps deploy recycling technology in this country, because when you use uranium fuel in a reactor, you only use 5% of the energy in that fuel. So when we take it out and we put it in the used fuel vaults or in the dry storage containers, there's still 95% of that energy left. So getting back to energy efficiency, we don't think that's a wise use of uranium fuel. We hope that the Obama administration, in its examination of a policy to go forward, looks at the potential for recycling used fuel. Energy Secretary Chu supports that aspect. The worldwide scientific community supports that aspect, but we would like to do it in a manner that's a little bit different from the rest of the world. We'd like to develop a technology that at the end of the process, you mix plutonium with other byproducts, so it can't be used in weapons grade stock. That's the difference we want to explore first in the laboratory and then commercialize it. That's going to take, honestly, 20, 25 years to develop. But this is not a sprint getting to our energy future. When you look at climate change goals that are out there, they're 2030 and 2050. This is not a sprint. So we have time to develop longer-term technologies that can help us meet those goals. Nuclear power is available today from the electricity generation side to begin that job. Wind, solar, biomass, energy efficiency, conservation are available today to begin that job. But we have to start looking long-term as a country, and that's a difficult thing for us to do. It's certainly a difficult thing for Congress to do, but I think they're getting there. When you look at the role of nuclear, and I'll close with this, when you look at all the analysis that's been done, not only here in the US, but globally, at what kind of electricity portfolio that we need to ensure the reliable supply that we want, to reduce the carbon footprint that we're putting on this world, and to maintain a diversity of supply of electricity, because this is just like any other aspect of your life. You don't want just one food for dinner. You don't just want to drive one car your entire life. You want some diversity. It's the same thing in the electricity sector, and it's important from a national security perspective. Okay, we are blessed that we have the natural resources that we have, so we can use natural gas, we can develop renewables, we can use geothermal heat, and we can use nuclear. Not all countries are like that. France is almost 80% nuclear because it has no natural resources. So it has to be nuclear. Japan the same way, very limited natural resources, so it's almost 30% nuclear. Nuclear is an important part of our energy security goals. We can become less reliant on other sources of energy, particularly in the transportation sector as electric vehicles are developed. One of the best ways we can look at that backing oil out of the transportation sector is to go to electric vehicles and use carbon-free sources to charge them. Again, that's another good role for nuclear energy and another good role for renewables on peak when that day comes. And I think from the auto industry, it's probably going to come soon. So with that, I'll close. Look forward to your questions and conversation after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sal.
Turn my little private mic back on here.
Very good.
Great, thanks. So I also want to just touch on a couple of points. With regard to diversification of our energy portfolio, I mean, this is one point where Scott and I clearly agree that we should have a diverse energy portfolio, and yet that agreement still leads us to very different decisions. When I look at Maryland's energy portfolio, we already get 30% of our nuclear, or 30% of our energy from nuclear. We only get 1.2% from wind, solar, geothermal, and biomass combined. So if we're talking about diversifying our energy portfolio, it doesn't mean ramping up the thing that we already have 30% of. It means ramping up the things that we are currently underinvesting in. So, you know, we need to be ramping up our wind, solar, and geothermal resources in the state, rather than, you know, ramping up our nuclear capacity. I also wanted to just highlight one thing with regard to cost, because at one point in his presentation, Scott put up a chart that outlined the cost of different energy resources. And I was looking at that chart, and a lot of it looked right, but then it looked to me like there were a couple of really key emissions. So energy efficiency was not up on that chart, and combined heat and power was not up on that chart. Had they been, nuclear power certainly would have been bumped down 2 rungs. And the capacity factors for energy efficiency is even higher than nuclear power. Capacity factor for energy efficiency is 100%. I want to talk a little bit about the role of government in energy. Scott just now mentioned that renewable sources of energy are receiving lots of government subsidies, and they're still not coming to scale. If there's ever been an industry on life support, it's the nuclear industry. I mean, Wall Street won't touch investing in nuclear energy with a 10-foot pole. The only way that a Wall Street financial house is going to invest in nuclear power is if that nuclear power plant is backed up by federal taxpayer loan guarantees. Unistar, which is the partnership between Constellation Energy and Areva, or Electricité de France, to build Calvert Cliffs 3, has said that unless 80% of the construction costs are backed up by taxpayer loan guarantees, they're not going to build the plant. In other words, they want taxpayers to assume the risk of the project. That basically means $8 billion. If the plant costs $10 billion, which is Constellation's estimate, I think it's very likely that it'll be higher than that. That means that there are taxpayer loan guarantees of $8 billion of your money and my money that's insuring this project. And the Congressional Budget Office estimates that 50% of the nuclear proposals are going to default. So if my taxpayer money is going to get used, I certainly want a better guarantee than 50%. So the loan guarantees are one aspect of where nuclear power is on government life support. Another key factor where government underwrites the nuclear power industry is in insurance. Go to State Farm and go to Aetna and ask them for insurance on a nuclear reactor, and they're going to laugh you out of their shop. The only entity that has the financial resources to insure a nuclear power plant is the federal government. And every couple of years, Congress reauthorizes an insurance program that basically puts taxpayers on the hook for most of the costs should there be an accident or an attack at a nuclear power plant. Again, if you look at the subsidies that are going to nuclear power versus the subsidies that are going to clean, renewable sources of energy, the nuclear subsidies absolutely dwarf the clean energy subsidies. I want to also just talk about what that means. Scott is saying, we need to do everything. We need to do wind, we need to do solar, and we need to do nuclear. The reality is that resources are limited. We live in a resource-constrained world. And if we spend $10 billion pursuing nuclear in Maryland, that's $10 billion that is not being invested in wind or solar or geothermal or energy efficiency. In fact, right now, Constellation Energy, while they're pushing this ambitious nuclear agenda, is actually woefully behind on meeting the state's energy efficiency goal. It would be much more in the public interest if Constellation got serious about their energy efficiency programs and spent the time and the energy bringing those programs up to scale rather than pushing this expensive nuclear proposal. And again, the same thing with the federal loan guarantees. I think those, right now, $18.5 billion are set aside for taxpayer-backed loan guarantees for the nuclear industry. That's essentially taxpayer money that's already been put in that pot and allocated. those are resources that are not being used to bring these other truly clean, renewable resources online. I've heard, I want to talk a little bit about jobs. So in his presentation, Scott said that building a new reactor at Calvert Cliffs 3 would create 4,000 short-term construction jobs to build the reactor and then 400 permanent jobs at the plant. So let's actually do the math. $10 billion to build the plant. Let's round it up and say 5,000 jobs. That's $2 million per job. From a jobs creation program that is the least effective jobs program that I have ever seen in my life. Constellation would be better off just handing that money out on the street. You'd get more economic benefit for it. By contrast, there have been a lot of studies that have been done on the job creation potential of investing in energy efficiency and truly green technologies. And a study that came out of the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, out of their economics department, estimated that for every $1 million we invest in clean, renewable sources of energy, you get 16.7 jobs. So if you scale that up to $10 billion, it's 165,000 jobs in Maryland. And those aren't nuclear technician jobs. Those are contractors who will do caulking and weatherization in your home. Those are welders who are putting together wind turbines. Those are truck drivers who are moving the turbine pieces. Those are folks working in the Port of Baltimore to go out and service the offshore windmills. So we could get a lot more economic bang for our buck if we actually invest our energy dollars into clean, renewable energy than if we invest in nuclear. I also want to address this issue of baseload power, and I actually want to pull a quote here. So there's this concept, right, that we need a certain amount of baseload power that's always there to, just meet the basic energy demand of our society. Now, this is a quote from John Wellinghoff, who is the chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, one of the leading government agencies that looks at the electric grid and the electric system in the United States. And in April of this year, John Wellinghoff said, quote, "I think baseload capacity is going to become an anachronism. We may not need any new coal or nuclear plants ever." End quote. Another quote is, quote, "You can't ramp up and ramp down a nuclear plant. And if you have instead the ability to ramp up and ramp down in ways that can shape the entire energy system, then the old concept of baseload becomes an anachronism." I say this because our energy use is not stable. So in the Mid-Atlantic region, in 2008, the amount of electricity required at 5 p.m. on a hot June afternoon was nearly 3 times the amount of electricity used at 5 a.m. on a temperate May afternoon. 3 times. So, it's been conventional knowledge that we need these baseload plants. But the reality is, as our electric grid gets smarter, this kind of ironclad rule that baseload must be met through a traditional baseload nuclear plant or coal plant is starting to become not true. There are very sophisticated entities that operate our electric grid, and they can predict and control the flow of electricity through that grid. So, as long as they manage the grid well, the lights will stay on reliably. So, it's not necessary for society or electric consumers to, build these incredibly expensive centralized nuclear power plants solely because we think of them as baseload power when, there are more creative and ingenious ways in the 21st century that we can actually meet our energy needs. And then lastly, I've been going to a lot of hearings in the state recently around nuclear power, and I've seen I've seen a lot of people wearing, Maryland's clean energy future is a nuclear energy future, and I just want to, nip this in the bud. Nuclear power is not clean. The mining of uranium creates serious water pollution. Rivers, lakes, and streams across the country, especially in the Midwest and in the West, are really suffering from this pollution. Communities are suffering from this pollution, and we don't know what to do with the waste. And while nuclear power plants may be low carbon while they're operating, so are all the other technologies that I've highlighted today. And so we need to make sure we're comparing apples to apples in a fair way. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're ready now to have some questions from the audience. Would you say which member of which of our speakers you want to address? Yes, please.
Yes. My name's Norm Meadow. I'm Vice President of the Maryland Conservation Council, which is one of the oldest conservation groups in the state, and it's adopted a pro-nuclear policy. It's endorsed the construction of Calvert Cliffs #3. I have many questions, but let me ask what I think may be the most pertinent one to Johanna. You said that you could equal the output of Calvert Cliffs #3 with something like 6 square miles of solar collectors.
Twice, actually, 300 or
Okay.
3,000 megawatts.
Can I ask what capacity factor you assumed for those collectors? Because I did a calculation based on the actual performance of the Nellis Air Force Base installation, which is in the Nevada desert. And if you extrapolate up to the output of the reactor from the Nellis base's actual performance, which is 20% capacity, it would be lower in Maryland. You arrive at a figure of 110 square miles. So I'd like to hear where you think that's wrong. And along the same lines, if you're talking about a 30% capacity factor for offshore turbines, you didn't mention the number of those turbines that you'd need to equal the output of the Calvert Cliffs #3 proposed plant. My calculation says that at 30%, you'd need about 1,500 turbines. Mr. Pickens' plant will require 330,000 turbines. You could probably fit all of them in his front yard, but I think some of them would spill over. He wants to make 20% of our electricity on the plains with wind at a 30% capacity factor. You look at the website of his plant, it never tells you how many he's going to have to put up. It's 330,000 turbines. So.
Great. Thanks for your questions. I can definitely follow up with you on the capacity factor we use for the solar. It's in a report that has, all that documented, so I can follow up and get that figure to you. And then with regard to the number of turbines, I'm not sure. The particular data point the point that I was looking to make is that Maryland has tremendous offshore wind capacity. If we maximize that offshore wind capacity, and I'm not saying that we should, because I think there could be migratory bird patterns there or other sensitive environmental areas
The right
that would
whale lives there.
that would prohibit placement of turbines in some of those locations, certainly. But if we were to maximize that resource, we could power Maryland 12 times over in any given year.
That would require many, many thousands.
It would require many, many thousands, no doubt.
Another question? Yes, please.
I'm Don Norris, Department of Public Policy at UMBC, and I've got a question about a phenomenon named NIMBY and banana. Everybody knows what NIMBY is. Banana is billed absolutely nothing, absolutely nowhere, anytime. And it has somewhat supplanted NIMBY in the last couple of decades, I think. I am concerned whether it's with regard to solar or wind or nuclear, if we're ever actually going to build anything. I'm not going to take a position whether nuclear is good or bad, whether we should have wind turbines in the bay or on the mountains. It seems to me, though, that when we talk about our energy future, we've got to talk about the political capability of overcoming an attitude on the part of American voters, American citizens, that nothing should be done to obscure their view or anything else that they dislike, whether it produces energy or whether it doesn't produce energy. Can you tell me what your organizations are doing to try to overcome this?
That's a great question, and it's a serious issue.
It's also a serious issue with regard to transmission lines.
I was getting ready to say that, absolutely. It's not just generating facilities, it's the transmission lines that we need to move the power to the places that need it. And that's not just the case with nuclear, but with renewables as well. With nuclear power plants, most of our 22 projects that are in the licensing process now are going to be additional units, additional reactors at existing nuclear plant sites. That's intentional for many reasons. We already have the infrastructure in place to move the electricity onto the grid. A few of those projects will require some transmission upgrades, but generally speaking, most of the facilities can handle a new reactor there without an expansion of transmission facilities. We do have the cooling water systems there, whether it's rivers, lakes, streams, oceans. We have the cooling ability there, or we can take steps to use the cooling ability that's available. In Calvert Cliffs situation, they're going to do some very innovative things with cooling water technology, desalinization of bay water, so they're not using groundwater resources, lower profile cooling towers that are certainly more sensitive to the environment, as well as this visual issue that you talk about, the NIMBY issue. We have among those projects 2 greenfield sites that companies are exploring to build new reactors, one in South Carolina and one in Florida. And much like Calvert Cliffs, or Calvert County, I should say, there has been actually a reverse NIMBY process in terms of getting those projects sited because of the economic development potential that exists for those projects. Now, to be honest with you, one of the projects in Florida that's a greenfield site is only about 8 miles away from an existing nuclear power plant, so there is knowledge in that community about nuclear energy already, and that makes a huge difference. One of the things that you'll see in just about any research on this issue is there's a very low public awareness of energy issues broadly, and how electricity is generated, what it takes to get it from point A to point B, the costs associated with that. And so one of our responsibilities as an industry is simply to educate, much like we're doing here today, is to lay out the options that are available, lay out the impacts that are going to be accrued from those projects, both benefits in terms of electricity supply, cost of power, environmental benefits, workforce issues, but also lay out what some of the negative attributes might be, because there are negative attributes to every fuel source to generate electricity. So from my organization's standpoint, part of our job is to go into those areas and to have the dialogue about energy production and specifically about nuclear energy. And I think the one thing that our recent experience with gas prices has done, particularly when it was at $4 a gallon, was to heighten public awareness to the energy challenges that we have ahead of us. Al Gore has done more for environmental issues and climate challenges than anybody in the world probably. And so if you put those 2 issues together, this broadened awareness of the energy challenges that we have, not only in cost, but to ensure that we as a nation, we're secure in our energy supply, and then couple that with the climate change challenges that clearly are at the forefront of people's minds today. I think that's done a lot in the last 5 years to really heighten the education broadly on energy. We see it as our role, not only at NEI, but within our industry to enhance that education. But from a nuclear standpoint, many states where nuclear plants are being sited today and are successfully being done, other energy facilities have not been able to be sited.
Thank you. I think this is a really good point. And I think there was just recently a Washington Post article, it might have even been this morning, about, you know, a lawsuit regarding wind turbines in Western Maryland and concerns about bats. There, I guess, our organization, one of our kind of priority campaigns is moving forward energy efficiency, partly because it's a win-win on this issue. You know, you don't have to cite any kind of new facility for energy efficiency, you just have to put some caulking around windows and, you know, put insulation in the attics and, you know, improve these industrial processes. And it really is a virtual power plant that is distributed throughout homes and businesses and industries across the state. And again, you know, I think the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, which is a group based in Washington, D.C. that contracts with utility companies all the time to develop energy efficiency programs, says that the potential for energy efficiency in Maryland is that we can reduce our energy use 30% by 2025. That's a tremendous resource. It really is a virtual power plant. And so by making sure that we maximize that resource, you actually avoid some of these really tricky siting questions.
Could I follow
But
up
then-
on that for just a second?
Sure.
Because I have the potential to be an NFL quarterback,
Mhm.
but it ain't gonna happen, because the potential is so small.
Right.
When you talk about energy efficiency, and I agree with you, we need to do it, it's a very diffuse kind of thing involving everybody.
Right. So
Where and how, you know, I know how a nuclear power plant's gonna get built, all right? I know how these other things are gonna happen, but absent a clear-cut program that somebody implements, and that somebody's gotta be government, and funds,
Mhm.
it's unlikely that everybody in my neighborhood is gonna go out to Sears and buy a new refrigerator.
Right.
So how, that's the equivalent of overcoming NIMBY. How would you see, and how would your organization see
Yep.
that potential, even half of that potential, realized?
So Maryland actually has an energy efficiency goal written into state law, 15% reduction in per capita electricity use by 2015. That's a real reduction of roughly 7 to 8% energy use in the state as our population continues to grow. That law basically says the utility companies are responsible for 2/3 of those savings, and the other third is going to come through other sources like improvements in appliance standards that were just passed, or through government programs like a lot of the stimulus money that's come down. Utility companies have traditionally, in Maryland and in lots of other states, been the provider of energy efficiency services. And right now, BGE and Pepco and Delmarva and Allegheny are all in the process of ramping up these programs. BGE's programs were approved last spring, Pepco's were just approved in August. And it really is a very broad slate of things. I mean, there is no silver bullet to doing this. You need to have a bunch of different avenues. Just some really basic examples that are out there that are successful are light bulb rebate programs. So if you go to Home Depot, you know, and you have the choice of a compact fluorescent bulb or an incandescent bulb, there's a coupon right there that says save $2 if you buy the compact fluorescent bulb. That makes it cheaper than the incandescent bulb. Consumers are much more likely to get that. They go to the register, they get the refund right then and there. A CFL uses 85% less energy than an incandescent bulb. Very similar programs are happening around appliances, so appliance rebate programs. A couple of years ago, utilities were giving out air conditioners for free to low-income customers because it was actually cheaper to just replace that old air conditioner than to kind of run those old ones. BGE has programs to help commercial, small commercial businesses replace their refrigeration units. They'll pay for 80% of those costs. Now, the key thing for consumers to know is that those programs get paid for through a small surcharge on utility bills. So we all pay for that, but the programs are much, like I said, to save a kilowatt of power, it's 4 cents per kilowatt hour. For buying it on the wholesale market, it's 12 cents per kilowatt hour, and you see those savings month after month. Home energy audits, that's kind of the first thing for homeowners, to have somebody actually come. Right, massively expensive. And the utility companies can actually offset that cost. So right now, BGE has I think you can get a quick home energy audit for $40, And if you adopt any of the recommendations, then the audit is actually free. And for low-income customers, the audit is free already. What's that?
The implementation is massively expensive.
And then the second point to kind of the NIMBY banana piece is that it ultimately comes down to politics, and all politics is local. So, you know, one of the things that Constellation has done very well in Calvert County is, you know, build political support. You know, Scott was saying that the Calvert County Board of Supervisors, you know, unanimously supports the project. It's true. You know, they are bought in. And I think any developer of a project needs to have a community relations plan to educate the public. Blue Water Wind, which is the developer of the wind farm that Delmarva Power, you know, signed a contract with, they now have a guy who, you know, has been making the rounds in Maryland for about a year and a half. You know, they're thinking about putting some wind turbines off the coast of Ocean City. And so they're doing community outreach, they're meeting with all the local elected officials, they're meeting with the neighborhood associations to educate the public around that project. So I think that in many ways it does fall on the developer to make sure that they do the education work around their project and get the community bought in. Sorry, that
Do
was
we
long.
have another question?
One more.
Yes,
Sort of
please.
like normal, I'm like Herman over with questions. Well, I'll just limit it to one. My name's Charlie Marcinkiewicz. I'm a consultant in the environment. I do work for Department of Energy and National Laboratories as well as Unistar. Hear that? What I'm curious about is I hear a lot about the sort of decentralized energy and the push in that direction. I don't hear any support for any kind of centralized energy, and even the only ones that you mentioned, the offshore wind turbines, you've already admitted you may not be in support of that because of migratory birds or whales or whatever. What I'm curious about is, has PERG actually come out in support of any centralized energy facility greater than, say, 100 megawatts or 50 megawatts?
I mean, there are a lot of projects that we don't have a position on. So if there's a natural gas plant proposed for Charles County, we don't have a position on that. You know, there isn't a, I think that our role as an advocacy group is to look at the options that are available and push the public debate in that direction. So, you know, the fact of the matter is that distributed generation is the direction that we should be taking our energy future into, and so that's what we're advocating for.
So that's your overall position, distributed energy.
Certainly energy efficiency, and then distributed energy and, you know, wind, solar, geothermal. Sure.
But you've not backed the wind, you've not backed any wind actual project.
We haven't.
Okay, I'm curious.
Question?
Yes, it's been a long time since I took a chemistry course. How much uranium does exist in the world, and how accessible is it, and where is it located?
There's a report done every year by the World Nuclear Association in London, and they essentially survey all the mining companies and uranium companies around the world. And that report came out, I think, a couple of months ago, was, if I remember correctly, is the time frame on it. And they said that there are 100 years of known uranium reserves to be mined around the world. A lot of that uranium is in Canada, Australia, countries like Kazakhstan. For us, we have some in the U.S., although we haven't had a lot of new mining starts in the U.S. because of the U.S.-Russian agreement to use uranium from the warheads, and then because of the low price of uranium from Canada or Australia, so it didn't make sense to begin a lot of new mining in this country. So we feel very confident that we have the uranium reserves that we need for the expansion that's contemplated now. Like every market, if there is a significant upswing in nuclear energy expansion, like is envisioned by the Environmental Protection Agency to meet the Waxman-Markey bill. So if you have 187 reactors that somehow we're going to have to build in this country, and there's going to have to be a lot of policy changes to make that happen, then you'll start to see a lot of new uranium mining activity around the world to meet that demand. Other countries use thorium, which is another element in their reactors. That's mostly done in India because India has a wide supply of thorium. And so, I think we are very comfortable globally where our uranium supply is today, and we are comfortable that the market will continue to evolve. The one thing we don't have, the competition and the structure that we'd like to have in this country is the ability to enrich that uranium to get it to the level where we need it in nuclear power plants. We enrich uranium to about 5 or 6%, whereas weapons grade enrichment is about 90%, much higher. So we keep it at 5%. We have one facility to do that today. There's one being built in New Mexico, which would be a second facility, and there are 2 other uranium enrichment facilities that are being contemplated by other companies. And that's important for us as a nation, and given the discussions that are taking place at the International Atomic Energy Agency, it's important for us as the world looks at expanding nuclear energy technology. What we think is a good idea is to have the countries that currently have uranium enrichment technology enrich the fuel for those countries that do not yet have it but are interested in developing commercial reactor technology. They should have that right to build commercial plants. But I think from an IAEA perspective, they would be much more comfortable if the current countries that have enrichment would be the providers of fuel. So you don't get into a situation that we have today in Iran, where we're trying to figure out, if they have enrichment facilities, where they are, get inspectors in there. That's a solid program at IAEA, but it would make a whole lot more sense to confine the enrichment to the countries that have it today, and let us be guaranteed fuel providers, and then take that fuel back to the countries, recycle it, keep the process going.
Well, I think we have to end our program now with very warm thanks to both our speakers here. If some of you have further questions, please do stay a bit for refreshments, and there will be an opportunity for more talk about these problems. Thank you very much.